My name is Evelyn Whitmore, and I am 68 years old. Most mornings, I wake with the sun spilling through the blinds of my small, mobile home, letting its warmth brush across the hardwood floors. Today, the air was crisp, just enough to hint at spring's arrival. I had a simple task ahead, a Saturday errand I had run countless times before picking up my son Thomas's coat from Julian's dry cleaner. Nothing more than a routine, and yet, as I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and stepped out onto the quiet street, a strange prickling of unease ran up my spine. The neighborhood was still waking. I waved to Mrs. Patterson watering her azaleas and nodded to Mr. Ruiz walking his beagle. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a house 2 doors down, where my grandchildren often played on Saturdays. Lucy and Max were asleep now, tucked in bed, their soft breathing drifting up the staircase. Even with the comfort of routine surrounding me, I felt a flicker of tension, something I couldn't name, whispering that today would not be as ordinary as it seemed. I moved along the familiar streets. The salty tang of the nearby bay carried on the breeze. The warm sun kissed my cheeks, but my mind wandered to the errands stacked for later groceries, laundry, and the little projects that kept a house of grandchildren running smoothly. Life had a rhythm at my age, a dependable beat I had learned to trust. Yet, as I approached the corner where Julian stood, the wooden sign swayed in the morning wind, and the familiar scent of cleaning solvents drifted out the door. A subtle tension tugged at me. I held the crumpled receipt in my hand, Thomas's handwriting neat and hurried. Mom, please pick up my coat at Julian's. Thanks. His trust in me was effortless, and I felt a swell of pride, being the one he relied on, especially with Lucy and Max in the house. Always made me feel needed, useful. I stepped inside the dry cleaner, the bell above the door jingling softly. Julian, hunched over a ledger, looked up and gave me a small nod. Normally, I would hand him the slip and wait while his assistant retrieved the coat. Today, though, Julian rose himself, moving toward the back with an unusual deliberation. My fingers tightened around the receipt as I followed, the cozy predictability of my Saturday errand beginning to unravel. The back door of the shop opened, and I felt the first real chill of unease seep in, a premonition that the ordinary was about to change. Julian's footsteps creaked against the worn wooden floorboards as he guided me past stacks of neatly folded garments and towering racks of coats. The familiar scent of soap and fabric softener hung in the air, but today it felt heavy, oppressive. His hands, gnarled with age, gripped my arm with an urgency that made me stumble slightly. Evelyn, he murmured, his voice almost drowned by the hum of the steam press in the back. Come here for a moment. I followed him toward a narrow corner behind a faded curtain, my heart beginning to pound. Julian had been my neighbor and friend for decades. He was a man of habit, measured in his words and deliberate in his movements. Yet now, every line on his face seemed etched with fear, every glance darting toward the doorway as if someone might be listening. He lowered his voice to a whisper, shaking as he spoke. Take your grandchildren out of town before dawn. You can't stay here tonight. Do you understand? I froze, a chill crawling up my spine. My mind spun with questions. Lucy and Max were safe in their beds at home, oblivious to the world's dangers. My son Thomas was away in Atlanta, trusting me, as always, to care for them. Yet here was Julian, shaking, urging me to act as though the world itself might collapse before morning. What are you talking about? I managed, my voice trembling more than I wanted. The casual Saturday morning had transformed into something dark, ominous. Julian reached into the pocket of his apron and pulled out a small, clear plastic bag. He held it out toward me, fingers quivering. I found this inside the coat. I couldn't leave it there. You need to see it for yourself. My hands shook as I accepted the bag. Inside, I glimpsed a folded document and, beneath it, a photograph that made my stomach clench. My breath caught. The photograph, 2 children, smiling innocently, with bright red circles crudely drawn around their faces, was unmistakably Lucy and Max. My pulse quickened, a rush of panic and disbelief mixing with the protective instinct that had defined me for decades. Julian's eyes, wide and pleading, met mine. I don't know who they're working for. Evelyn. But this isn't just a prank or a mistake. You have to get them out of Mobile. You have to leave now. I could barely nod, my throat tight. Every instinct screamed that he was right. But the reality of packing, of leaving the children behind in the familiarity of home, terrified me. The thought of running through streets in the dead of night with 2 small children in tow was overwhelming. The hum of the dry cleaner's machines, once comforting, now sounded like a distant warning. Julian stepped back, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "There's no time to argue," he said, his voice low but firm. "Go home, gather them, and leave. Before dawn. You understand?" I swallowed hard, nodding again. My hands gripped the receipt for Thomas's coat as if it were a lifeline. Outside the curtain, the world seemed the same sunlight pooling on the floorboards, the quiet whir of the shop. But I knew, deep down, nothing would ever feel ordinary again. Every second mattered now. I had to move quickly, yet carefully, for Lucy and Max. I could hear the faint squeak of the street door behind me, the morning calm belying the urgency that pulsed through my veins. My errands had changed. My Saturday had changed. And somewhere in the shadows, danger was waiting. Back in my quiet, mobile home, the weight of Julian's warning pressed on me like a stone in my chest. Lucy and Max were still asleep, curled beneath their blankets, their soft breathing steady and innocent. I knelt beside their bed, watching their little chests rise and fall, trying to steady my own shaking hands. The small plastic bag Julian had pressed into my palm seemed impossibly heavy now, as if it carried not just objects, but the gravity of something dark, something I was unprepared to confront. I carried the coat into the living room, laying it gently on the couch. Its fabric smelled faintly of Julian's softener, comforting in a way that mocked the tension thrumming in my veins. I slid the zipper down and reached inside the pocket, my fingers brushing against the crisp texture of a small bag I had seen in his shop. When I pulled it free, I froze. Inside, neatly folded, was a bank transfer receipt. The sum printed in bold numbers made my stomach turn far larger than anything Thomas or Maggie could reasonably handle. I counted again in disbelief, my eyes scanning the paper. And then again, millions. My hands trembled as I set the bag down, my heart thundering. And then I saw the photograph beneath it. My breath caught, and I sank onto the edge of the couch. Lucy and Max were there, smiling in the sun, their tiny hands entwined in carefree play. Yet someone had marked their faces with circles, thick and crude in red marker, twisting their innocence into something menacing. My stomach dropped. My pulse quickened. The air in the room felt suddenly colder, as if the shadows had thickened around me. I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to comprehend the impossible. Maggie, the daughter-in-law I had once trusted, someone I had considered almost a daughter, had betrayed our family in a way I could scarcely imagine. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. The bank receipt, the photograph, the urgency in Julian's voice all pointed to a reality I wasn't ready to face. I paced the living room, clutching the coat like a shield, glancing at the quiet forms of Lucy and Max. The room, once familiar and safe, now felt like the stage for a horror I could not yet name. My mind raced. Who was behind this? Why my grandchildren? What could Maggie be planning? The questions circled endlessly, each one sharper than the last. I sank into the armchair, the plastic bag on my lap, and let my gaze fall on the children again. Their innocence was a lifeline, a tether to keep me from panic. I whispered their names softly, grounding myself. I could not let fear paralyze me, not when they depended on me. The protective instinct that had guided me for decades surged forward. Fierce and unwavering, I stood abruptly, making a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. The calm morning light streaming through the windows suddenly felt deceptive, hiding dangers that could strike at any moment. I would not wait for Thomas to return. I could not risk the children's safety for even a minute. Clutching the bag tightly, I moved to the bedroom, beginning the process of gathering essentials. Clothes, snacks, blankets, everything the children would need for a sudden departure. My fingers worked quickly, but my mind could not stop turning over the photograph. The receipt, the red circles that seemed to burn into my vision. Outside, the streets of Mobile were quiet, sun glinting off the pavement, giving no hint of the threat hovering close. Inside, my heart pounded with a new rhythm, one of fear, disbelief, and the first real spark of determination. I would act before dawn. I would protect Lucy and Max, no matter the cost. And somewhere in the shadows, Maggie's plan waited, unaware that the grandmother she had underestimated was already moving. I moved swiftly through the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every step felt urgent, every second precious. I opened Lucy's closet first, pulling out her favorite blue sweater, a soft pair of pajamas, and a stack of clean socks. Max's superhero pajamas and small dinosaur toy went into a separate bag, alongside a few of his snack bars and a bottle of water. My fingers trembled as I tried to gather what they might need for the night. Realizing the ordinary rhythms of our home had shattered, I glanced at the photograph Julian had given me again. The red circles burned in my mind, a reminder that this was not just a precaution, it was a necessity. My instincts screamed that Maggie's betrayal was active, that every minute we lingered increased the danger. I packed blankets, a couple of familiar stuffed animals, anything to give the children a sense of comfort amid the chaos. Moving through the kitchen, I gathered food that could be eaten: cold sandwiches wrapped in foil, granola bars, a couple of bottles of juice. I stuffed them into a small insulated bag, making sure everything was balanced and easy to carry. My breathing was rapid, uneven, but I forced myself to focus. Panic would not help. I needed clarity, strategy. I paused by the staircase, looking at the sleeping forms of Lucy and Max. Their small bodies, curled under the covers, were innocent and unaware, and my chest tightened at the thought of dragging them into danger. I knelt beside them, brushing a stray lock of hair from Lucy's face and smoothing Max's arm under the blanket. "We're going on a little adventure, my loves," I whispered. They murmured in sleep, untroubled by the weight of my fear. Next, I considered the route. The streets were familiar, but I had to account for traffic, neighbors, and the possibility of someone following. I would use side streets, avoid main roads, and keep the headlights dim. Every choice felt critical. I ran through the plan in my mind, rehearsing steps and contingencies. By the time I returned to the living room, the bags were stacked neatly near the door, but my mind still raced. I checked each bag, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavy on my shoulders. I needed to move quickly but gently, to keep the children calm, to keep them unaware of the danger that hung over us like a storm cloud. I looked out the window, the evening light softening into dusk. The neighborhood seemed peaceful, oblivious to the urgency within my home. My fingers tightened around the handle of the last bag, one last glance at the children, sleeping soundly, and I whispered a silent promise to protect them. The night would come soon, and with it, the beginning of our flight. My steps were measured but determined as I positioned myself for what lay ahead. Every decision mattered, every movement counted. And somewhere beyond the walls of our familiar home, danger waited, unaware that we were already preparing to move. The sky had darkened to a deep navy, the last traces of sunset fading behind the rooftops as I quietly guided Lucy and Max down the hallway. Their small hands gripped mine tightly, trusting me without question. Their breathing uneven with sleepiness and the faint edge of fear I could feel radiating from them. I moved like a shadow through the house, careful to avoid the squeak of floorboards, careful not to awaken neighbors who might notice us leaving at such an hour. Every step carried a sense of urgency, and yet I forced myself to slow, to think, to stay deliberate. The front door clicked softly behind us as I swung it open, carrying the larger of the two bags in one hand while keeping the children close with the other. The night air was cool and sharp, carrying the faint scent of salt from the bay. Streetlights cast long, flickering shadows across the quiet sidewalk. For a brief moment, the familiar world felt alien and threatening. Every corner, hiding an unseen danger. I paused, listening, but the street remained silent, empty except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a passing car. I led them through the narrow side streets, avoiding the main roads where streetlights could illuminate us. Max's small voice trembled when a loose shutter banged against a building in the wind. "Abuela," he whispered. I crouched low, brushing his hair back and squeezing his hand. "It's all right, mi amor. We're safe. Just a little adventure. Remember?" He nodded, eyes wide, trusting me, despite his obvious fear. Lucy's head rested lightly against my arm, her small hand tucked into mine, and I felt a surge of protectiveness that sharpened my focus. Every movement felt critical. I avoided well-lit sidewalks and took turns onto quieter alleys. Streets I had walked countless times in the daytime, but now seemed narrow and unfamiliar. My mind raced, imagining shadows lurking, imagining Maggie or someone watching, waiting. Every sound, a distant dog barking, the scrape of a trash can made my pulse spike. Yet I forced myself to remain calm, to breathe, to act deliberately. We reached the car parked in the shadow of an oak tree. Its quiet hum of readiness was comforting, a lifeline. I lifted Lucy into the back seat, adjusting her blanket and making sure she had her doll tucked beside her. Max followed, already clinging to his superhero toy. Trying to appear brave, I took the driver's seat and glanced in the rearview mirror at their faces, half illuminated by the dashboard. My chest tightened at the weight of responsibility. These two lives depended entirely on my decisions, my composure, my courage. The engine started silently, and I edged the car into the side street, avoiding headlights from houses and street lamps. I kept my speed low, careful not to attract attention, yet quick enough to put distance between us and the unseen threat. The city felt empty, and the usual hum of nocturnal life was muted, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Every turn of the wheel, every corner, heightened the tension. Lucy murmured, "Are we there yet?" her voice small and worried. I forced a smile in the dim light, squeezing her hand. "Almost, darling. We're almost safe." Max leaned forward slightly, his wide eyes scanning the dark streets. and I could see him balancing fear and trust. As we drove through winding roads and back alleys, I felt the full weight of the night pressing in around us. Every shadow seemed to whisper danger. Every distant sound felt amplified. Yet with each mile, I also felt a growing resolve. No one would hurt my grandchildren. I would navigate every risk, outthink every threat, and reach the haven I had planned. The familiar skyline of Mobile in the distance offered a small sense of orientation, a reminder of the streets I knew but now approached with care. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my eyes scanning for anything unusual, anything that might hint that we were being followed. The children were silent now, trusting me completely, and I felt a rush of determination. The night was tense, uncertain, and heavy with possibility, but step by step, block by block, I guided us forward. Every turn brought us closer to safety. Yet the shadow of danger never fully lifted. My mind refused to rest. My heart refused to calm. I knew that by dawn, the course of our lives might already have changed forever. The taxi dropped us off at the small house on the edge of Mobile, a place I had known for years through my friend Rosa, a nurse I trusted completely. The porch light glowed warmly, casting long shadows across the yard, and for the first time since leaving home, I felt a flicker of relief. Lucy and Max stepped carefully onto the walkway, still clutching their toys, their eyes wide but calmer than they had been in the car. Rosa opened the door before I could knock, her gray-streaked hair pulled back neatly, her face lined with decades of compassion. "Evelyn, you got them here safe," she said, relief in her voice. She knelt to gather Lucy into her arms, brushing the girl's hair gently, and Max followed, leaning against her side. I watched them settle, their tension melting under Rosa's calm presence, and a small weight lifted from my chest. Inside, the house was modest but orderly, filled with the scent of antiseptic mixed with the faint aroma of cooking. I placed the bags of clothes, snacks, and blankets near the couch, knowing they would be enough for the night. Lucy clutched her doll and Max held his small dinosaur, both sinking into the cushions as Rosa tucked them in with a reassuring warmth. "Stay here as long as you need," Rosa said quietly. "No one will bother you tonight." Her eyes met mine, steady and reassuring, but I could see the unspoken truth beneath her calm. She knew, as I did, that this safety was fragile. I lingered in the doorway, reluctant to leave them, watching their small forms relax. The sound of Max humming a soft tune and Lucy's quiet giggle brought a bittersweet ache to my chest. I had protected them so far, but the knowledge that Maggie's betrayal and the threat still existed gnawed at me. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside reminded me that danger had not vanished. It was only delayed. Rosa placed a hand on my shoulder. "Go home. Rest if you can. You'll need your strength for what comes next." I nodded, grateful for the advice, but knowing sleep would be fleeting. My mind churned with plans, strategies, and the chilling image of the photograph with the red circles burned into my thoughts. Before leaving, I bent down and whispered to the children, "I'll be back soon. You're safe here." Lucy clutched my hand, and Max gave a small, trusting smile. The brief warmth of their trust steadied me, but as I stepped out into the cool night, I felt the lingering tension settle back into my shoulders. Outside, the quiet streets of Mobile seemed ordinary, almost serene. Yet I knew that tonight, this sanctuary was only temporary. Every instinct in me told me that we had escaped the immediate danger, but the threat remained a shadow waiting beyond the safety of these walls. Patient and unyielding, I inhaled deeply, bracing myself for the hours ahead. My grandchildren were safe. For now. And yet, the night felt heavy with the unspoken promise that the real challenge was only beginning. Morning arrived, with a pale light spilling over the rooftops of Mobile, softening the edges of the night's tension, but doing nothing to calm the storm inside me. I had spent hours watching Lucy and Max sleep, their innocence a fragile shield against the growing dread that had rooted itself deep in my chest. Even with Rosa's reassurances, I knew I could not face what lay ahead alone. I needed guidance, wisdom, and someone who could help me navigate the dangerous path I was now forced to walk. I drove carefully to St. Francis Church, its stone walls steeped in decades of history and quiet authority. Father Esteban, 75, waited in his modest office, sunlight spilling through the stained glass and painting the walls in muted reds and blues. His presence was calm and grounding, a steadying force I had always relied on in moments of uncertainty. "Evelyn," he said softly, his eyes taking in the tension etched across my face. "Come in. Sit. Tell me everything." I sank into the worn leather chair, clutching my coat to my chest, and began to recount Julian's warning, the discovery of the bank transfer, the photograph with the red circles, and the crushing weight of realizing Maggie's betrayal. My voice shook at times, the words catching in my throat. But Father Esteban listened without interruption, his gaze steady, absorbing each detail as if storing them for the moment when they would matter most. When I finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "This is serious," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not just a family issue, this involves potential criminal activity. You must act carefully. But you must act." I nodded, feeling both the relief of having shared the burden and the gravity of what he said settling on my shoulders. "Do you know anyone who can help with legal matters? Protective orders investigations?" I asked. He hesitated a moment, then reached for his desk phone and dialed. Within minutes, he had arranged for me to meet Fernanda, a young lawyer from a nearby firm who had worked with him on previous cases. Fernanda arrived promptly, her presence professional yet approachable. She carried a small briefcase and a notebook, her eyes sharp and attentive. "Mr. Esteban told me what's happening," she said, offering a warm but measured smile. "We'll review everything and discuss options for protecting the children and addressing the criminal elements involved. Let's start with the documents you have." I handed her Julian's plastic bag, the weight of it heavier than any object could possibly be. She examined the bank transfer and the photograph carefully, her expression shifting as she pieced together the implications. "This is serious," she murmured, tapping the receipt and the image. "The sums involved and the markings on the children suggest premeditation. We will need to act quickly, but methodically. We can consider temporary protective measures, coordinate with law enforcement, and secure the children's safety while investigating the adults involved." I felt a spark of hope, the first in days. For the first time, I could see a path forward, careful, deliberate, and guided by people I trusted. Father Esteban nodded at me, his gaze full of quiet reassurance. "You are not alone, Evelyn. You have support, and together, we will protect them." As Fernanda and I began to outline the first steps where the children could remain safely, how to collect evidence without alerting Maggie, and the legal channels to pursue, I felt the tension in my chest ease slightly. The plan was not complete, and the danger was far from over, but at least now I had allies. At last, I could begin to move from panic to action, shaping a strategy that might keep Lucy and Max safe and bring the truth to light. The late morning sun slanted through the blinds of Fernanda's office, casting stripes of light Across the polished wooden floor, I sat at the small conference table. My hands clenched in my lap, the weight of the plastic bag from Julian still pressing against my memory. Lucy and Max were safely at Rose's, their laughter and chatter absent from the quiet tension that filled the room. Every instinct in me was on high alert, knowing that every revelation could bring the danger closer. Fernanda opened her laptop, the soft hum of its processor filling the silence. She wore gloves as she carefully examined the documents, her fingers flying over the keys with precise efficiency. "Evelyn," she said, her tone controlled but edged with gravity. "I've started tracing the financial paper trail, and it's far worse than we first imagined." My pulse quickened. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. Worse. How she hesitated for only a moment before sliding the screen around to show me a network of accounts, transfers, and company registrations. These are shell companies, registered across several states. They have no real operations, just financial fronts. The bank transfer you found is part of a much larger series of movements. And that's just the start. My stomach turned. I had sensed betrayal from Maggie. But this was orchestrated on a scale I couldn't have imagined. I had always worried about the immediate safety of Lucy and Max. But now I realized the web of deceit and danger extended far beyond our home. Fernanda continued, pulling up more files. Fake passports. Plane tickets purchased under assumed names. Multiple destinations booked in advance. Maggie and Cortez are planning to leave the country, taking the children with them. This isn't a moment of panic or a reckless impulse. It's carefully calculated. I felt the blood drain from my face. My own daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into our family and trusted like a daughter, had been planning to abduct her own children. My mind flashed to the photograph Julian had given me, the red circles drawn over the children's faces. They weren't random, they were targets, marked in advance. Fernanda leaned back in her chair, her eyes meeting mine. "We're dealing with professionals. Evelyn, this isn't just family betrayal. It's organized, methodical, and potentially international. We need to act quickly, but with precision. Any misstep could put the children at risk." I closed my eyes, swallowing hard, letting the reality of her words sink in. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from the rush of adrenaline and fear. Everything I had taken for granted, the safety of my grandchildren. The trust within my family was gone. The world I thought I understood had fractured into something unrecognizable. Fernanda's voice drew me back. "I've already contacted a few colleagues who can assist with the investigation. We'll need to coordinate with law enforcement discreetly, secure temporary protection for Lucy and Max, and gather evidence against Maggie and Cortez before they realize we're onto them." I nodded, the sense of helplessness slowly giving way to determination. My grandchildren were counting on me, and I would not allow them to be pawns in a criminal scheme. Every fear, every late-night worry, now had a purpose. I would fight with everything I had. She pulled up another set of files, flight itineraries, receipts, and a series of communications between Maggie and an unknown associate named Cortez. The connections were unmistakable. My mind raced, tracing every possible scenario, every route they might take, every place they might hide. "This," Fernanda said softly, "isn't just a family crisis. It's a criminal conspiracy that could reach beyond our state, beyond our country. But knowing the extent of it gives us the advantage. We can plan, anticipate, and protect the children." I exhaled, the air shaky but resolute. The scale of danger was enormous, but now I had allies, a plan forming, and a clear understanding of the stakes. Maggie and Cortez had underestimated me. They had underestimated a grandmother who would move mountains to keep her grandchildren safe. I looked at Fernanda, and for the first time in hours, I felt a spark of control. The shadow of danger loomed larger than I had imagined, but it no longer felt insurmountable. I would confront it, step by step, strategy by strategy, until Lucy and Max were safe and the betrayal that threatened to destroy my family was exposed. Chapter 9. Connecting the Dots. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Father Esteban's office, casting long shadows across the scattered papers and laptops that littered the table. I sat with my hands folded tightly in my lap, heart still pounding from the rush of the previous night's escape. Lucy and Max were safe at Rosa's, but every detail I had discovered about Maggie and Cortez haunted me. Now, surrounded by the tangible evidence and two of the people I trusted most, I felt both the weight of responsibility and the first flicker of hope. Fernanda leaned over her laptop, eyes scanning the documents with practiced precision. "Evelyn, we have to map everything. Every transaction, every booking, every communication," she said, tapping the keyboard. "We need to see the full extent of their plan before taking the next steps. They didn't just act recklessly. This was calculated. And we have to understand the full picture." Father Esteban nodded, his hands clasped in front of him, a calm presence in the midst of the tension. "This is more than a family issue," he said softly, his voice steady. "The children's safety is paramount, but we must see the broader pattern. Understanding their strategy is the only way to protect them effectively." I leaned forward, glancing at the photographs, flight receipts, and bank transfers spread before us. My stomach twisted as I traced the lines connecting each document. Red circles over Lucy and Max's faces on the photograph. Transfers of large sums. Shell companies scattered across the country. It all began to form a disturbing map of intent. I swallowed hard, feeling the betrayal like a physical weight pressing against my chest. "They're not just planning to take the children," Fernanda continued, her voice low but firm. "Every transaction and every reservation points to a broader financial scheme. They've insulated themselves legally and financially, thinking no one could follow the trail. But this pattern shows where the children will be and when. That gives us leverage to act before it's too late." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as the magnitude of the plan sank in. Maggie, the woman I had welcomed into our family, had orchestrated months of preparation to manipulate and endanger the children. Cortez had coordinated with her, calculating every detail to evade suspicion. My hands clenched in my lap, nails pressing into my palms. But I forced myself to breathe steadily. Panic would not help Lucy and Max. Precision, foresight, and courage would. Father Esteban spoke again, his tone gentle but urgent. "Evelyn, your instincts, your knowledge of their habits, and your ability to remain calm are invaluable. You are a key part of this plan's success. We must combine your insight with Fernanda's expertise and law enforcement coordination." I nodded, determination hardening within me. We have to act carefully, but decisively. Every step must protect the children and build a legal record of their intent. No mistakes, no gaps. "The stakes are too high." Fernanda's eyes softened briefly as she glanced at me. "You're right. The law can't undo what's been attempted, but it can stop it and hold them accountable. Mapping everything and anticipating their moves will give us the advantage. We can stay one step ahead." Hours passed as we pieced together the network of deceit, connecting bank accounts to aliases, flights to fake identities, and messages to their intended actions. Each connection intensified the weight of responsibility, but also clarified the path forward. I traced the patterns with my finger, envisioning each move, each contingency, each point where we could intervene. By the time the sun dipped lower in the sky, the full scope of Maggie and Cortez's plan had begun to take shape before us. My heart still raced, but I felt a growing clarity. The threat was vast and the danger immediate, but we were no longer blind. We had the map, the allies, and a strategy forming one that could protect Lucy and Max while holding the perpetrators accountable. I drew a deep, steadying breath, feeling a mixture of fear, resolve, and grim determination. The network of betrayal was wide, but now, piece by piece, we were connecting the dots and the first moves toward justice were beginning. The conference room at the small mobile precinct smelled faintly of coffee and paper, but my focus was sharp. Every sense tuned to the task ahead. Fernanda spread the documents across the table, the flight itineraries, bank records, and hotel reservations forming a map of Maggie and Cortez's intentions. Father Esteban sat beside me, hands folded, his presence steady and reassuring. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of control, an ability to act rather than merely react. Fernanda pointed to the map. Here is the pattern. They travel lightly, avoid main roads, and use multiple aliases. They think they're invisible, but we can predict their next moves if we coordinate carefully with law enforcement. I leaned in, examining the highlighted routes. So if we know the hotels, the transfers, and their schedules, we can create a scenario that forces them into a controlled location without alerting them to our presence, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. My eyes flicked to Father Esteban, who nodded quietly. Yes, Evelyn, Fernanda agreed, but it requires precise timing. If they sense surveillance or anticipate interference, they could accelerate their plan, and the children could be at risk. That's why we need your insight. You know their habits. Every detail counts. I swallowed hard, recalling Maggie's predictable morning routines, the way she checked her phone constantly, and the subtle patterns she left behind without noticing. They like to avoid suspicion, I said. If we create a situation that seems normal to them, they'll follow it willingly. Maybe a hotel booking confirmation or a staged pickup that looks routine. Fernanda typed quickly, noting my suggestions. Exactly. We can use the information to set a lure. Law enforcement will monitor remotely, ready to intervene at the first sign of deviation. The goal is to capture them without the children seeing danger, without exposing anyone else. Father Esteban cleared his throat. Evelyn, are you certain about this? The plan requires you to interact indirectly with Maggie. It is risky. I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the resolve building within me. I have to. I know her habits. I know what will make her feel safe enough to follow the plan. We have to use that knowledge. Lucy and Max's safety depends on it. The team worked through the afternoon, running simulations, adjusting timing, and preparing contingencies. Fernanda called in a colleague, Officer Diego, who specialized in surveillance and rapid response. His presence added a technical layer to the plan that I could rely on without being exposed to the operational risks. By early evening, the outline was clear. Maggie and Cortez would be led to a seemingly ordinary pickup point, believing the children were being transferred for a weekend trip. The route, the timing, and the signals were all coordinated with law enforcement, who would remain unseen until the moment they could safely intervene. I took a moment to review the plan myself, envisioning each step from my perspective. Every detail, every hesitation, every possible misstep had been considered. I thought of Lucy's wide eyes, Max clutching his dinosaur, and I felt a fierce determination. I would not allow fear or doubt to interfere. Every step of the plan needed to protect them, and I would be vigilant. Father Esteban placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've done well to stay composed. Evelyn, courage and clarity will guide us tonight." I drew in a deep breath, steadying myself against the weight of what lay ahead. The trap was set, the team ready, and every contingency accounted for. The night would test us all, but for the first time in weeks, I felt the possibility of triumph. Maggie and Cortez believed they were clever, but they had not anticipated a grandmother who would risk everything to keep her grandchildren safe. As the room quieted and the sun dipped below the horizon, the plan was final. The hours until execution stretched before us like a taut wire. One misstep could unravel everything. Yet the trap was ready. I could feel the tension coiling, a living pulse through my chest, and I prepared to move with courage and precision, knowing the safety of Lucy and Max depended on the next few hours. Chapter 11. High-Stakes Operation. The night air was thick and still as I watched from the unmarked car parked several blocks away. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, but my heart raced with every passing second. Fernanda sat beside me, laptop open and connected to the police surveillance feed. Across the room, Father Esteban's calm presence offered a tether to sanity, though even he looked tense, eyes narrowing at the series of live camera feeds. "Everything is in place," Fernanda murmured. "Officers are in position. The route, the signals, the pickup point, it's all ready. They'll follow it exactly as we planned, or we intervene immediately." I drew a deep breath, steadying myself. Lucy and Max were safe with Rosa, but the thought of Maggie and Cortez anywhere near them sent a spike of fear through me. Every instinct screamed that even a small mistake could unravel the entire plan. The stakes were impossibly high, and I was painfully aware that the slightest hesitation on my part could cost us everything. Through the night, the silence of the streets was deceptive. Shadows stretched long across empty sidewalks. Leaves rustled in the occasional wind, and the faint hum of distant traffic seemed amplified, each sound setting my nerves on edge. Then, finally, the surveillance feed showed movement. "They're on the move," Fernanda whispered, pointing to the screen. Maggie's car appeared, turning precisely as expected. Cortez sat beside her, checking his phone, unaware that every step had been anticipated. My chest tightened. This was it, the moment we had prepared for, rehearsed in every detail, yet never fully experienced until now. We watched as they followed the seemingly ordinary instructions laid out to lure them to the pickup point. Maggie appeared confident, her fingers tapping impatiently against the steering wheel, oblivious to the network of officers lying in wait. Cortez glanced around, muttering something under his breath, but their calculated steps played right into our plan. The tension in the car was palpable. I clenched my fists in my lap, my knuckles white, willing myself to stay calm, to act only when necessary. Fernanda's voice, quiet and controlled, guided me through the feed. "Soon. Patience. Wait for the signal." Minutes stretched like hours. I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples. Every turn of the car, every red light passed, brought Maggie and Cortez closer to the trap. I thought of the photograph with the red circles, of Lucy's trusting eyes and Max's small hand in mine, and a wave of protective resolve surged through me. They would not take my grandchildren. Not tonight. Not ever. Finally, the signal came. Officers moved in with precise timing, blocking the route, lights flashing, voices commanding. Maggie's confidence faltered instantly, her eyes widening in panic. Cortez tensed beside her, realizing the net had closed around them. The scene unfolded with a raw, chaotic energy doors slammed. Officers shouted, and the two conspirators tried to resist, but the coordination of law enforcement left them no choice. I held my breath as they were removed from the vehicle, handcuffed and secured. Maggie screamed, words torn from her in panic and disbelief. Cortez struggled, but the weight of evidence and the precision of the trap left no room for escape. I felt a tremor of relief, a spark of triumph mingled with exhaustion. Father Esteban placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "It is done," he whispered. "You have done what you needed to do. The children are safe." I nodded. Though my chest was still tight, I had anticipated the danger, orchestrated with Fernanda and the police, and yet seeing the confrontation unfold in real time brought the full gravity of it crashing down. Maggie and Cortez had underestimated me, underestimated the lengths a grandmother would go to protect her grandchildren. The tension finally began to ebb as officers secured the scene. The chaos settling into the quiet authority of the law. The trap had worked, perfectly executed, but my hands remained slightly trembling, the adrenaline refusing to leave entirely. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the relief wash over me in small, cautious waves. Lucy and Max were safe. The perpetrators were in custody. Justice, at least for tonight, had prevailed. Yet the weight of the night, the betrayal, and the danger we had just survived lingered in my chest like a shadow I could not yet shake. The sun had just begun to rise over Mobile, casting a warm, golden glow across the streets. But inside me, the tension still hummed. I had spent the night pacing, watching the live feeds from law enforcement, and waiting for confirmation that Maggie and Cortez were in custody. Every hour stretched endlessly, each minute a reminder of how close my grandchildren had come to danger. Finally, Fernanda's voice came through the phone, steady and reassuring. "They're secured. Both Maggie and Cortez are in custody. The children are safe. The evidence is intact, and charges have been filed." I sank into the chair, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Relief washed over me in a wave so strong I felt it in my bones. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to relax, even just a little. Lucy and Max were safe, far from the immediate threat that had hovered over them like a storm cloud. Rosa had already sent me pictures from the temporary refuge. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter bright and carefree, unaware of how narrowly they had escaped. Seeing their smiles, I felt a fierce surge of protection and gratitude. Every sleepless night, every anxious mile traveled in the dark, had led to this justice had arrived before harm could touch them. Fernanda met me at the small precinct a few hours later, her expression calm but satisfied. "The arrests went smoothly," she explained, spreading the files on the table. "Law enforcement had everything prepared. Charges include conspiracy, child endangerment, and fraud. They won't be able to interfere with your family again." I nodded, tracing the lines on the documents, the formal weight of legal authority settling heavily, but reassuringly, on my shoulders. The world suddenly felt a little more tangible, the danger less immediate. I still felt the echo of fear lingering from the past days, but it was tempered now by the knowledge that the perpetrators were behind bars. Father Esteban arrived shortly after, his presence calm and grounding. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Evelyn, you did well. You protected them, acted decisively, and trusted the right people. The law has caught up. But your courage made this possible." I allowed myself a small smile, though exhaustion tugged at my limbs. The tension that had gripped me for so long was loosening, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. The threat had been neutralized, and I could finally breathe, knowing that Lucy and Max were safe under proper protection. Even so, I remained vigilant. Weeks of betrayal, danger, and careful planning had left their mark. I knew the shadows of past threats lingered in memory, subtle but persistent. Yet today, for the first time in a long while, I felt a measure of peace. The law had acted, and my grandchildren were no longer pawns in a scheme that had threatened to destroy their innocence. I leaned back, letting my hands rest on my knees. The sunlight spilled into the room, warm and steady. Justice had struck, and while the journey ahead would still require care, I finally felt the first genuine sense of safety in days. The immediate danger was gone, and the people who had sought to harm my family were behind bars, unable to act on their cruel plans. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to exhale completely, letting the relief settle into my bones and the knowledge that, at least for now, the worst had passed. The first rays of morning filtered through the blinds as Thomas stepped off the train in Mobile, his bag slung over his shoulder. Eyes scanning the platform until they found me. I felt a tightness in my chest, a mix of relief, lingering fear, and the weight of unspoken words, weeks of uncertainty, sleepless nights, and the constant worry for Lucy and Max had brought us to this fragile moment. "Mom," Thomas said softly, his voice carrying the exhaustion and tension of travel, but also something deeper: regret, fear, and the need for reassurance. He approached slowly, as though afraid to shatter the delicate balance that had kept us all safe these past days. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. The embrace was brief but loaded with meaning, a tentative bridge between the fear and anger that had simmered during the crisis. "You're here," I whispered, my voice trembling with both relief and lingering tension. Thomas nodded, swallowing hard. "I should have been here sooner. I never wanted this to happen." His eyes, usually so steady, reflected the turmoil of a parent who had felt powerless while his children were in danger. I reached out, placing my hand over his, feeling the warmth and the unspoken apology in the gesture. We sat down together in the small living room, the light of the morning soft on the floorboards. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, sighing heavily. "I can't believe Maggie. I trusted her. And she almost," his voice faltered, thick with emotion. "I failed them. Mom, I failed you." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "No, you did everything you could from where you were. The failure would have been in not acting when the time came. And we acted. That's what counts." My own voice shook, but I tried to steady it for both our sakes. The room was quiet for a long moment, filled only with the soft ticking of a clock and the distant sounds of Mobile waking up outside. We both let the weight of the past week settle, acknowledging the fear, the betrayal, and the relief that now coexisted in our hearts. "I can't believe she would plan something like that with the kids," Thomas said finally, his eyes dark with the memory of the photograph, the red circles, and the months of plotting. "I thought I knew her. I thought I knew our family." I nodded slowly, my own mind replaying the discoveries, the plastic bag, the bank transfers, the careful orchestration of a plan meant to separate our family. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who surprise us in the worst ways. But that doesn't mean we give up. It means we rebuild carefully. Together. Thomas exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Together," he repeated. "We have to protect them. Always. And we have to heal. Somehow." I reached out again, placing a hand on his arm. "We will. It will take time, but we will. The children are safe, and that's the most important thing. The rest, we face as a family." Outside, the morning grew brighter, the world moving forward as we began to reconcile, feeling the first fragile threads of trust being rewoven. The emotional fallout of betrayal and fear was not gone, but together, we found a path toward understanding, relief, and the slow rebuilding of our family bonds. The morning sunlight streamed gently through the kitchen windows, casting a warm glow over the small apartment Thomas and I had rented near the center of Mobile. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint aroma of toast, grounding me in the quiet rhythm of everyday life, a rhythm that had once felt impossible to imagine. Lucy sat at the table, carefully spreading peanut butter on her toast, while Max chased after the family cat with a squeal of laughter. Their innocence, so threatened just weeks ago, seemed to bloom anew in these simple moments. Thomas leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee, and smiled at the children. "Don't forget to pack your backpacks for school," he said gently, his voice steady now, no longer tight with anxiety. I watched him, realizing how much he had grown in these past weeks, how quickly the fear and uncertainty had sharpened him into a parent who knew the stakes and understood the weight of responsibility. We had worked with Fernanda and Father Esteban to establish a series of protective measures. Our phone lines were monitored, travel routines adjusted, and school commutes carefully coordinated, while it felt burdensome at times. These precautions gave us a sense of control that had been absent during the crisis. More importantly, Lucy and Max had begun to feel safe again, their laughter and curiosity returning slowly, as though our combined vigilance had created a cocoon around their childhood. After breakfast, Thomas and I sat down to discuss schedules, grocery lists, and weekend plans. The mundane details of life suddenly carried enormous significance, a testament to how fragile and precious normalcy could be. "We need to maintain routines," I said, folding laundry, trying to infuse calm into my voice. "They need predictability, something consistent that reinforces safety." Thomas nodded, brushing a strand of hair from Lucy's face as she helped clear the dishes. "Agreed. And we also need to be mindful of ourselves," he added, glancing at me. "We can't protect them if we aren't steady too." In the afternoons, we took the children to the park, letting them play under our watchful eyes. Lucy ran through the grass, her laughter ringing out, while Max built elaborate forts with sticks and stones. Completely absorbed in his own imaginative world, I felt a sense of relief wash over me every time I saw their smiles. Each moment of joy a small victory against the fear that had dominated our lives for so long. Evenings were quieter. We shared meals, read bedtime stories, and tucked the children in, holding them close for a little longer than usual. Each hug, each whispered good night, reinforced our bonds, rebuilding trust, layer by layer. Thomas and I exchanged glances often, silent acknowledgments of the distance we had traveled from terror to tentative peace. Yet even as we settled into this routine, a part of me remained vigilant. The memories of red-circled faces, the plastic bag, and the months of plotting lingered at the edges of my consciousness. I knew the trauma could not simply be erased, but it could be integrated into our story, a caution, a reminder, and a testament to resilience. By nightfall, the apartment was calm. Lucy slept curled against her blanket. Max's small snores punctuated the quiet, and Thomas and I sat together on the couch, hands intertwined. We had faced betrayal, fear, and uncertainty, and now we were slowly weaving back the fabric of our family. Life felt fragile, yes, but in that fragility was also hope. The threads of trust, once frayed, were beginning to mend. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that peace real, enduring peace might be possible again. The courthouse loomed large as Thomas, Lucy, Max, and I approached, its stone steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps. The air carried a crisp, autumn chill, a stark contrast to the tension that had settled in my chest. Inside, The atmosphere was charged. People whispered in hushed tones. Lawyers shuffled papers, and the distant echo of a gavel punctuated the murmurs of the crowd. This was the stage where truth and consequence would meet, where the weight of months of fear and planning would finally be addressed. Maggie and Cortez were led into the courtroom in handcuffs, their expressions carefully composed, but betraying flickers of unease. They had tried to act confident, as though their plans had been clever enough to evade justice. Yet every eye in the room seemed to press upon them, including mine. I felt a strange mix of fear, anger, and relief. The people I had once trusted were now facing the consequences of their betrayal. Fernanda and Officer Diego were present, documents in hand, prepared to lay out the case meticulously. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and an air of impartial authority, called the room to order. The trial began, and evidence unfolded with precision. Bank transfers, flight bookings, false passports, and intercepted communications painted a clear picture of premeditation and criminal intent. The scale of Maggie and Cortez's scheme became undeniable. I watched as the prosecution detailed how Maggie had orchestrated every step, from financial manipulation to the calculated risk of abducting Lucy and Max. Each document, each testimony, was another layer of the truth exposed, stripping away the facade they had attempted to maintain. Cortez's involvement was equally clear, a co-conspirator whose careful planning had enabled the entire plot. My hands gripped Thomas's arm tightly. The red circles from the photograph flashed in my mind, and for the first time, I felt a sense of justice approaching its conclusion. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as jurors and onlookers processed the evidence, the weight of truth filling the space like a tide rising against a dam. Maggie's expression faltered when Fernanda presented the flight itineraries and communications showing the intent to remove the children from the country. Cortez shifted uncomfortably, realizing that every contingency they had accounted for had been anticipated by law enforcement. Their carefully constructed narrative unraveled before the eyes of the law. As the judge summarized the charges, conspiracy, child endangerment, and fraud, I felt a deep relief. Months of fear, sleepless nights, and frantic planning had led to this moment. Justice was not abstract anymore. It was tangible, arriving in the form of accountability for those who had endangered my family. Lucy leaned against my shoulder, and Max held my hand, both unaware of the full extent of the danger they had been spared. I met Thomas's gaze, and we shared a silent acknowledgement the ordeal was far from forgotten, but we had faced it together, and the law had upheld its promise. When the judge called for a recess before deliberation, I exhaled, a shiver running through me. The courtroom had revealed the depth of the betrayal and the seriousness of their crimes, but the process was not yet complete. Yet the sense of justice being served, the affirmation that our struggle had not been in vain, filled me with a cautious hope. The courtroom had exposed the truth, and for the first time in weeks, I felt that my grandchildren's safety and the integrity of our family were being recognized and defended. The mornings in Mobile had taken on a soft, steady rhythm, one that spoke of safety and small victories. Sunlight spilled over the balcony of our modest apartment, warming the worn wooden floorboards, while Lucy and Max ran barefoot through the living room, their laughter ringing clear and bright. The past weeks of fear, uncertainty, and betrayal had left their mark, but in these moments, life felt tangible again, full of possibility, fragile, but real. Thomas and I moved through the routines we had built together, careful and deliberate. School drop-offs, grocery runs, and quiet evenings, Reading stories or preparing meals had become anchors, steadying us after the storm of events that had threatened to dismantle our family. Every day was a testament to resilience, to the ability to rebuild from fragments and fear. I watched Lucy carefully place her doll beside Max's toy dinosaur, their small hands working in tandem, orchestrating imaginary worlds with complete innocence. My heart swelled with a mixture of relief and lingering ache. These children had been marked, targeted, and nearly torn from our lives. And yet here they were, discovering joy in the smallest corners of a safe apartment. Thomas sat across from me at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee. His expression was calm, but I could see the lingering tension in the set of his shoulders. We didn't need to speak. The shared understanding was enough. We had survived. But survival carried with it a weight of responsibility, an ongoing vigilance to protect what we had reclaimed. In quiet moments, I reflected on the ordeal, the whispered warnings at the dry cleaner, the shocking discovery of the plastic bag, and the photograph, the meticulous planning required to safeguard the children, and finally, the courtroom that had delivered justice, courage, love, and persistence had guided each step, yet the emotional scars remained. I traced the edges of those memories gently, acknowledging their presence without letting them dictate our future. Fernanda had become more than a lawyer. She was a trusted ally, a steady hand in the chaos that had defined our lives. Father Esteban continued to provide guidance and reassurance, a reminder that faith and reason could coexist even in the darkest moments. Their support had been vital, but it was the choices Thomas and I made, our commitment to each other and to the grandchildren, that had truly carried us through. As evening fell, the city lights glimmered through the apartment windows, casting a gentle glow over the rooms. Thomas helped tuck the children into bed, their small hands curling around ours as they drifted into sleep. The quiet of the apartment was profound, yet comforting, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the days before. I sat in the living room afterward, letting the stillness settle around me. The weight of fear had lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism. The threat was gone, the perpetrators behind bars, and our family intact. Yet the journey had changed us, leaving marks of resilience, caution, and a deeper understanding of trust and love. I took a deep breath, allowing the hope of the future to fill the space the fear had occupied. Life in Mobile was not perfect, but it was ours, secure and filled with small joys, laughter, and love. We had survived, we had fought, and we had found a beginning from the fragments of a near-tragic past. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that the worst had passed, and that together we could face whatever came next.